how would you expect a war of this nature, this tragic war that we're witnessing here, to affect incumbent leaders around Europe, and specifically to affect Macron and his popularity? Because I see in the most recent polls he's actually losing a little bit of share, but he is still well ahead of Le Pen.
Yeah, he's lost maybe 1%, but these polls come out essentially every day, and he is on around 30% in the first round. And then when you look at the second round, which happens 2 weeks later in April, he thrashes any given opponent, including Le Pen. So the goal of the first round is essentially to get into the second round, and that he clearly will do because he is the front runner. The Economist, sorry to mention a rival, has their model puts him at 97% probable to win the second round. In terms of the statesmanship, a couple of things to understand about France. One is that there is tremendous support throughout the country for the French military, for French military independence, and for the fact that France is the only country in NATO, aside from the United States, to have full spectrum defense capability, which it builds on its own nuclear missiles, its own helicopters, etc., and its own special forces, and its own navy. So in general, I think, anytime you rally around a wartime leader, you clearly see that person's ratings go up. In this case, it would have happened anyway. And I don't think Macron has done anything different, because here's my second point. The French Constitution gives the President of the Republic wide power in international relations. And that idea of France as an independent, although anchored in the West, global voice, if not global power, is something that is so structural in the country. I think he would have done what he's done regardless. Now, as to the leadership across
Nicholas,
Europe,
good morning. Sorry, Nicholas, can I just jump in there and say,
of course,
on that point, you talk about the independence of France and its independent capabilities and trying to reassert its independence. Obviously, Macron's been very visible in terms of foreign policy, particularly around the Russia-Ukraine crisis. Do you think that's more about trying to assume the mantle of the de facto leader of Europe now that Merkel is no longer there? Or do you think it's more about asserting France's independence and ability to assert its foreign policy independently of Europe?
I think it's much more the latter. And I don't think it's electioneering. Because until Olaf Scholz made the announcement he did about 100 billion euros for defense and will go past 2%, the one area where the French-German couple was in a situation of considerable inequality was on defense. And that remains the case. Now, to go back to Anna's question about leaders around Europe, in actual fact, I don't think Macron is trying to be the leader of Europe. Because he doesn't actually have to. He will be when re-elected, if re-elected, the most senior, and along with Draghi and Scholz, that creates quite a good triumvirate. Macron clearly is the guy who was best positioned, also because he's the head of state, unlike Scholz, who is head of government, to sit at the end of that long table with Putin. France has a policy of we speak to everyone. And I think the idea of trying to engage Putin in a dialogue is one that's very supported in the French public.
Okay. And what about the migration crisis that we are now seeing across Europe, Nicholas? What should the messaging, or what kind of messaging would play well for Emmanuel Macron here to show the right level of compassion, but also acknowledge how migration has been a tense issue in the past in French elections?
Well, here we get into some very delicate ground, which is because there have been many people who said, well, these immigrants, these refugees are being treated in a way that's more favorable than those from Syria or those from Iraq or other places. But I think it's inevitable that this is Europe, and there is a perfectly human tendency to be very affected by people who look like us, act like us, share our values, etc. Whether or not that's actually true in every single case doesn't really matter. It's just human instinct. So in terms of Macron's policy, the EU has made the rules. the contrast is not between France and some other country in the EU. Basically, the EU has said anybody who's a refugee can live, work, get medical and social assistance for up to a year, period. The difference is with the UK. And I think the difference there is that the UK is looking at these refugees as them. And the Europeans, the continental Europeans, are looking at these refugees as us.